Well, hello. I'm back again, and this is part two. Now, the first time I was here, I gave a little background about the Marine Corps background and the background of our entry into Vietnam. And I think I'll go over just a little bit of the background so I can put I can put our friends back into the picture again about kind of where we were. Now, my battalion landed in Vietnam on June the 15th, 1965. And I believe I mentioned the last time what it kind of, we had absolutely no idea of what we were going into. We got a briefing on our way down, and we had an intelligence officer give us a briefing saying something like, we asked the question about how long do you think we'd be in Vietnam before we go back to Japan and resume training in Japan? And he said, well, you might be in Vietnam maybe 6 months. It might take that long for us to win the war and for them to just quit fighting because they know who they're up against. And when they meet Marines, they know that they're going to be licked, and then we're just all go home after they surrender. That was the answer we got. Then we landed. It was our battalion commander said it was going to be an administrative landing, so we charged across the beaches, and there we were met by a bunch of schoolgirls with flowers and stuff like that. So okay, we got another briefing from an Air Force fairly high-ranking officer. I seem to remember the rank either colonel or lieutenant colonel, and he said, you guys don't have anything to worry about because the United States Air Force is going to cut the Ho Chi Minh trails. No personnel are going to be coming down the Ho Chi Minh trails, and there'll be no supplies coming down. So all you guys are going to have to do is be fighting some farmers out there wearing rubber-soled tire shoes and with weapons left over from the French in World War II and maybe some U.S. World War II weapons. Something sounded wrong here because all of a sudden we got the briefing on one hand, the South Vietnamese army is collapsing, the VC are taking out battalions whenever they want to, and they're getting ready to take out divisions, and we don't have to worry about anything because we're just going to face some farmers and the rice paddies and wait a minute, we're here because the people want us here, and the people love democracy and they hate Ho Chi Minh and they really all want us here. The people are desperate for freedom and they all want to fight Ho Chi Minh and et cetera, et cetera. But wait a minute. I couldn't get out of my mind the fact that, and a bunch of us felt the same way. I mean, well, wait a minute. They're getting ready to take out divisions. The country's collapsing except for the arrival of a foreign army. We're going to save them. And yet we don't have to worry about anything. I mean, the whole thing just didn't make sense. The words I use to describe Vietnam are Vietnam was an insane asylum. It just, nothing made any sense. And I looked off to those hills west of Da Nang because I could see them. I mean, from the tent we were in when that colonel was talking to us, and those are big hills. You're going to cut those with bombs? Okay, maybe, I don't know. I mean, what do I know? I'm only a second lieutenant, kind of thing. So there we go. Vietnam, for we in the infantry, was an insane asylum. And it was also a bloodbath. I described some of the activities. I'll go back into that again a little bit too. But one of the things that I wanted to mention that I'm going to reiterate again is that I am alive now because I had a 6 weeks break-in period from June the 15th roughly until the end of July, perhaps the beginning of August, to break in. By breaking in, I mean I was able to do what our initial job was in our battalion was to keep the security for the Da Nang airfield. That was our job. Now, there were lots of Vietnamese soldiers around there too, so it was basically what we would call a safe area. So we did our patrolling, and we went out on what they call med packs. We had doctors go out in the villages, and hearts and minds, people-to-people programs, pacification, that kind of thing. They hand out some pills and do some examinations and things like that. And I made a lot of mistakes as a platoon commander. And one of the first big mistakes I made is going out into a big rice paddy. And I realized immediately, if there had been enemy around us, we'd all been wiped out. And so I went back to my platoon in the evening and said, okay, I want everybody to know that I really, really screwed up. And I'm not going to be stupid enough to do that again. And then my platoon really my squad leaders, I didn't have my full platoon, but I had my squad leaders around me. My squad leaders and platoon sergeant went, thank God. And then we all got into a good conversation. And from that time on, every morning we get together, have coffee together. Every evening we get together, have coffee together, talk about what we did right, what we did wrong, what we were going to do, et cetera, et cetera. So at that point, I became a real platoon commander. This was 6 months after I'd been a real platoon commander. So I had another 10 months to go. Altogether, I spent 16 months as a platoon commander. So that was a pretty long time. We'll kick this off about fighting in the villages, because that was part of the insane asylum is when we started going out into the villages. Well, it didn't take too long because Marines are very, very aggressive. So we knew that we had to get out and start fighting the VC, because again, please remember, we were in Vietnam because the Vietnamese government was on the edge of collapse. It was on the edge of collapse because the Viet Cong had started in regimental formations, wiping out, annihilating South Vietnamese army battalions. Now, when an army gets to the point where it is wiping out, where the local militia, which are called the Viet Cong, these were not the North Vietnamese army, and they would go all the way from squad to platoon to company, battalion, regimental, at that time, regiment size. The key to the whole thing is in 1965, 40 miles outside of Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, 2 Viet Cong regiments annihilated a Vietnamese Marine Corps battalion and also a Army battalion. And that was the sign. This is the end. At that time, according to official histories, South Vietnam was losing a battalion a week. Now, no army can afford that. So this is why we were called in. It was either we came in or collapse. So a decision was made at the national level that we would come in and we would carry the fight for South Vietnam. So we knew as Marines, we're not going to be on that base very long because we're going to have to go out into those rice paddies and fight. So we all understood that. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. On one hand, we are told the Vietnamese people will love you because they want democracy and they want to fight against the evil Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese communists. But again, common sense indicates, where are all these Viet Cong personnel coming from? They have to be supported by the people. These people aren't getting there's no helicopter resupplies from North Vietnam or any place else. So where are they getting their food? Where are they getting their weapons? Where are they getting everything? Well, they're getting them from the people. And does that mean the people love us, or do the people love who? Well, this was a real question for us. But it wasn't a question that lasted very long, because as soon as we started going out into the rice paddies, and our battalion went out south, and as soon as we headed south, we started going into the villages, booby traps, punji stakes, And punji stakes are what they call, there were big harpoon-like things, and they'd be covered over on the trails. And once you stepped on one of those things, one of those harpoons would go straight through your feet. And of course, they were all tipped with excrement and everything like that to make sure that you got poisoning and everything else in your system also. So, I mean, as soon as we started going out in those villages, we began to understand these people do not want us here. This is something I want our audience to really understand. These people saw us as only a continuation of French colonialism. The whole party line was, and I found this out later in my second tour in Vietnam, when I became very integrated into the Vietnamese world. Now, remember, in this first tour of mine, I didn't speak a word of Vietnamese. I didn't know anything about Vietnam. Nobody I knew anything about Vietnam. We knew zero. But we did know these people don't like us. And you could tell by the way they were looking at us. Now, life for a platoon commander in Vietnam was very complicated because we were dealing in villages, and these villagers, even though they hated our guts, they wanted to sell us things, Cokes, beer. The Vietnamese ladies would come out with these very delicious baguettes of bread, which we loved, by the way, and we would trade our sea rations for that or money or whatever. Dealing with South Vietnamese was a very tricky situation because so many of them were, again, Viet Cong. And we did understand that after going through the villages, they didn't like us. But on the other hand, they wanted to sell us stuff. So we had kind of systems set up for that. So we bartered back and forth and et cetera, et cetera. And of course, kids are kids and they'll become friendly. And it got complicated back and forth. I'm going to add another complication, which is going to be, I think, kind of an interesting one. One of the things that I wanted to stress with my troops was this: discipline, professionalism. It was a decision made by our commanders at the national level. We're going to fight in these villages. Now, when you fight in villages, civilians are going to get killed, no matter how you cut it. There's no amount of anything you can do to prevent that. But the decision was made is we're going to fight in those villages. So one of the things that I emphasized to my troops was professionalism and discipline. Now, I'm not stressing professionalism and discipline necessarily from a moral point of view. Now, I don't want the audience to think that I'm just really a sweet, loving old guy, that I loved humanity or anything. But one of the things that I'd done in my peacetime Marine Corps, I'll go back to the first part I did. I mentioned that I did 2 peacetime tours in the Far East on Okinawa and traveling around. So I had done 2 transplacement tours already. And in those transplacement tours, I had seen Marines, and alcohol was a big part of our lives in those days. I had seen fights between Marines, Navy, Marines, Army, Marines, and all fueled by alcohol and rage. These fights that I witnessed and sometimes was part of, they're not Hollywood John Wayne fights where everybody's just having a good punch up. These were bottles, stilettos, weapons. People got killed. Eyeballs got knocked out. Teeth got knocked out. It was really, these were very bloody affairs. And one of the things that I took away from that is when Man the Beast takes over, and that's what it was in these fights. Man the Beast takes over. There is no rank involved. There's nothing you can do. And as platoon commander, and I knew what combat was I knew that people were going to get killed, that people were going to get hurt, and other Marines are going to get enraged by that, okay? I didn't want anything to happen because of that rage. So I stressed to my troops over and over again, we are going to be professional. There's nothing personal in this. These people hate our guts because they don't want us here. Would you want somebody in your hometown telling you what to do, yelling at you, screaming at you for identification cards? I mean, would you want that? And of course, the answer is no. So I said, look, we're going to be professional. We're going to fight. We will not become murderers. We will kill, but we are not going to become murderers. And we're not going to be killing civilians. I said, if I catch anybody even threatening a civilian or talking bad to a civilian, you are going to regret the day you were born. And I meant that very, very. And I went over and over that with my squad leaders and my men because I knew what was coming. And sure enough, booby traps, punji trip, people got blown up, their legs got blown off. And there was a lot of fighting in those villages too, because we were fighting a lot of VC and things like that. You could get killed very, very easily in that. My roommate in basic school arrived with his platoon. He didn't get the break-in period. Within 5 to 15 minutes into his first combat, he and his platoon were entirely annihilated because they fell. In Vietnam, if you fucked up, you were going to pay a terrible price. He and 35 of his Marines were killed in the space of something like 5 to 15 minutes. My friend, he was a great guy, a wonderful person, but he made the classic mistake in Vietnam. He was aggressive. Now, you're supposed to be aggressive. Well, yeah, but you have to be aggressive in a certain way, and you have to know when to be aggressive. Some Viet Cong started shooting at him, and he ran after him. And they sucked him out to an open rice paddy, and they killed every one of them. When you're fighting in South Vietnam and fighting those VC militia, and remember, they know every inch of that terrain. They know all the people. They know everything. They know the weather, the enemy, the terrain. They know everything, and we know nothing. And also, the people hate our guts. Two little stories here that give my personal philosophy. One time we were outside of a village and I heard a whole bunch of shooting going on down south of where I was. I mean, just one hell of a firefight going down there. And my company commander comes running across the rice paddy and says, Bill, get your platoon. There's another platoon down there and they're getting wiped out. You've got to go down and get them. You got to go down and, save them. So I start yelling at the platoon, get all the ammo you can, get all the ammo. Fortunately, for some reason, I had 260 mortars there with me, along with 2 machine guns and 2 3.5 rocket launchers. But I had the 2 extra mortars with me. So I said to the mortarmen, get all your mortars, get everybody, get all the ammo, get everything. Just ammo. That's it. Just lots and lots and lots of ammo. And we just started getting up and started to run. And I didn't even organize my platoon. I just started running, and the whole platoon began to organize. At that time, we trained enough together to where we just organized ourselves on the run down to the village. So we ran through a village, and the villagers were all there just doing their normal activities. And then we ran out into a huge rice paddy where the farmers were all just farming away. And then as we ran outside the village. We ran through the village and on the outside. But I got outside the village and I had a spontaneous intuition. They're all around me. They're all here. They're all around me. And I knew that, of course, when you're going to a big fight, they're going to organize. They know somebody's going to come to help. And they always organize to wipe out the people that are coming to help. So I ran outside the village, and then I had my spontaneous intuition, and I said, "Oh my God!" And I said, "Set up inside the village, just right on the edge." So we set up inside the village, And then I told one of my squad leaders, one of the great squad leaders, I mentioned his name last time, Sergeant Ortego, Sergeant Robert Ortego. I said, Sergeant Ortega, we've got to get to that platoon. But I said, I know they're here. So I said, you take your squad and get set up over, there was a little hill over from the rice paddy. I said, go up and set up on that hill and set up a base of fire over there. And then as soon as you set up your base of fire, we're going to come over, and then we'll be able to move on to help the platoon. As soon as Sergeant Ortega's squad heads out into that rice paddy and they're up hip deep into water, and of course the farmers are all there, but they're up hip deep in the water, then the VC starts shooting at them. And I mean, bullets were pinging I could see the bullets pinging around my squad in the water. And then they started opening on us inside the village and outside. And I mean, they set up a wall of fire. I put up my head about 4 times above the rice paddy I was behind, and I got dirt kicked in my face 4 times. But we set up a wall of fire. I mean, we set up a wall of fire. I told my squad leaders to the troop, just on anything that works, that hides a VC, just shoot at it, And so we got the mortars going, we got the rockets going. I had the machine gunners just burning up ammo like it. We set up a wall of fire you could walk across. We didn't see anybody, but we'd set up that wall of fire. So anyway, my squad finally got over there, and then they set up a base of fire, and then the VC just stopped. Okay. Well, that's the way they work. So we went over there, and then they'd stopped shooting at the platoon, so we were able to get the wounded and the dead out from the platoon, and we got them back. And then we walked back through the village. Farmers were still farming, villagers still doing all their activities. I can say this: during my entire first tour in Vietnam, in the 10 months of combat I spent there, not one villager ever came forth and said, there's a booby trap here, or there's punji states there, or whatever. Not one. But again, we didn't do anything. They did their thing. We did our thing. Okay? And that's the way my men took it. And that's the way we accepted it. So long before that movie, The Godfather, came out and made that saying, this is not personal, Michael. I was telling my troops in Vietnam this is not personal. We're going to be professional about this. And so we did. We didn't do anything to the villages or anything. Then on another occasion, we were going to another village. And on this village, above the village gate, there was a big, big communist star, the big communist flag. I told my platoon sergeant, I think there's a message there. I think there's a message there somewhere for us, and so we went through this village, and everybody was just staring at us. But just in this case, it was just nobody selling us cokes. It was just pure hate. We walked outside the village, and we went through it and took a look and didn't see anything. So we walked out. Then a sniper opens up. No big deal. Then a second sniper opens up on us, and again, no big deal. Then the third sniper opens up. And then I tell my rocket launcher, 3.5 rocket launcher, I said, I want Willie Peter in the tree at the end of the village. Willie Peter, or white phosphorus, this is something, if you get that on your skin, it's going to, say you get it on your hand, it's going to burn all the way through and drop out the other side. That's what white phosphorus does. It is some bad, bad stuff. Very, very bad. So I had my 3.5 rocket launcher put white phosphorus in a tree at the edge of the village, and the tree disappeared, poof, in white phosphorus. Then no more sniper fire, and we just walked on. They sent their message. We sent our message. Message given, message received. Yeah, okay. We can be quite civilized about this. So, I mean, there was a lot of that going on. Another aspect of this one of the things that you had to be as a platoon commander in Vietnam is be aware that you are totally and completely 24 hours a day, every second of those hours, you are going to be observed. You're going to be looked at for weakness. Where are you weak, and where can we hit you, and where can we kill you? That is what you had to live with as a platoon commander. And you have to figure that out every moment because they're watching and they know. I had a friend of mine that gave me his story. So this is another unit. I'm not going to mention the name. It goes along with my philosophy. I'm not mentioning the names of any people or any units because I don't want to cause any pain to anybody. My friend told me they were on this hill right outside of Da Nang. Nothing had been going on. They sent out the patrols and they would do this, and the rainy season is coming on. So they build little hooches to protect against the rain. But of course, when you build these little hooches, you can't see at night. And you're protecting yourself because you're getting comfortable. What's wrong with getting comfortable? Okay? So you build your little hooches and nothing's going on and the people seem very friendly and they're selling you the baguettes and the kids are coming out and they're selling the Cokes and the beer and friendly village. Yeah, no problem. And then after about 2 months of that, 1 o'clock in the morning, mortars go off, the whole top of the hill gets wiped out, and the attack begins. And they kill many, many, many Marines. Marines being Marines, they fight like hell. They were able to save the Marines. They were not wiped out. They were able to drive the enemy off. But it was a very close run thing. But that was life in Vietnam. The enemy could wait a couple of months. They didn't care anything about time. Those kids selling candy, those people in those positions, they knew where every machine gun was. They knew where everything was. Here we have to fight in these villages, but at the same time, we don't want to murder civilians. The Marine Corps in all the authority was always very specific about, yes, we have to fight in the villages, but we always have to remember, we have to think in terms of hearts and minds and all this other kind of stuff. Well, to me, all that hearts and minds stuff was just utter and complete nonsense because these people did not want us there. Now, that was always very clear. Now, I have another little story about not wanting us here. Now, this happened during my second tour in Vietnam. My second tour in Vietnam, I lived 24/7 with the Vietnamese. I spoke Vietnamese, I spoke French, I spoke some Mandarin Chinese. I communicated completely in Vietnamese. Sometimes we talk French with the older NCOs and stuff like that for fun, and sometimes a little Chinese just for fun too. We were getting together for supper together one night, and we were having a bunch of the battalion commanders over for a celebration. We'd had a good fight, and we were celebrating. And so a couple people were had gotten decorations and things, so we were celebrating that. And of course, as the old saying goes, in vino veritas, in wine there is truth. So there we are drinking and having a good time. And then one of the battalion commanders, Lieutenant Colonel, he said, one of the first things that we're going to do, he said, after this war is over, he said, we're going to kick every American out of Vietnam. We're going to take the country back, and we're going to kick all the communists out. We're going to kick every American out too. I said, he said how much he hated Americans. And of course, this is something I kind of understood, but I got really furious at the time. I said, how dare you say that? And I said that in Vietnamese. How dare you say that? I said, here we are, coming over here. And I said, a lot of my friends have gotten killed already for this country, kind of thing. And then, of course, everybody around the table goes, no, we didn't mean you, Captain. They called me Dai Wei because my rank was captain. Not you, Dai Wei. We don't mean you, Dai. Matter of fact, I want you to marry my sister so you can come over and live with us and things like that because you're one of us. You fight, but we don't want Americans. There'll be no Americans in Vietnam after this war's over. So this came from the South Vietnamese, senior officers. I mean, this attitude, I want to convey to our friends in the audience that there was a very deep-seated hatred of foreigners invading their country. Now, this is something old with the Vietnamese. They did it when they kicked out the Mongols. They did it when they kicked out the Chinese. They did it when they kicked out the French, et cetera, et cetera. Vietnamese are a people that don't like people coming into their country uninvited. I want to say this. If you are invited into their country, as I've been back to Vietnam 14 times since the end of the war, I've been treated like a king. First of all, because I'm a combat veteran, and they love combat veterans in Vietnam, because the overall feeling in Vietnam now is, as a combat veteran, and I've talked to many, many, many combat veterans, North Vietnamese, Viet Cong, and also former government soldiers. The overwhelming feeling among our old enemies, the North Vietnamese soldiers and everybody, and I've talked to veterans of Dien Bien Phu, is like, we have had this undergoing together. We share this experience together. The hatred that the Vietnamese felt for us in 1965, it wasn't personal. It didn't have anything to do with our race. It didn't have anything to do with our religion. It didn't have anything to do with our politics. We were just there, and they saw us as colonialists. Why are you here? You are here to rip us off. That is something I didn't understand that my first tour. I did understand it my second tour. And that's why 4 months after I was in Vietnam, I was writing my mother, the war's over. We've lost. Now, the United States military was not stupid. They were not stupid. They did understand pacification. They knew all about pacification. We have to win the hearts and minds of the people. In the 2 peacetime tours I did as a transplacement battalion, as a young enlisted man in 1960, and again in 1962, we were trained in counterinsurgency. I mean, we went through this counterinsurgency, and we're here to help the people, and we would have people dress up in civilian clothes and act the part of civilians, and we're going to win their hearts and minds and all this other kind of thing. And the big schooling of that came from officers that had been trained in Malaysia. But Malaysia was a different war than Vietnam. In Malaysia, there was an ethnic group, the Chinese, that you could separate out. In Vietnam, there was nothing. When you looked out at a couple thousand Vietnamese, they're all the same. We were living in a world, and we didn't know this at the time, in which there was no separation between Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army. It was all Communist Party. See, one of the things that many Americans were always involved with, the VC are doing this, but the North Vietnamese are something. It was like most Americans I met had this idea that the VC were one thing and the North Vietnamese were another thing. The North Vietnamese Army was something else. No, they were all the same. They were one. So when we were fighting, sometimes we would be fighting North Vietnamese units. I was involved in a couple very, very bad fights with North Vietnamese units. In one case, I think I mentioned before, Vietnam was a bloodbath. It was raining a little bit, and as my platoon, what was left over from my platoon, and we were walking down the trail, the water in the trail had turned pink from the blood of dead Marines that we were looking at up on the trail. We thought by giving out tons and tons of materials, building schools, and all this other kind of stuff, or giving money to people, all this would go into the hearts and minds. No, people would accept it, but it had nothing to do with the hearts and minds. The people basically did not want us there. Or were trying to kill VC. They're taxing the people. They're taking the rights of the people. They're doing all these kinds of things. But they are embedded in the society. And there's a difference about being embedded in the society and being an outsider trying to get inside the society. The Marine Corps tried what they called a civic action program. They had young Marines. I think by 1968 or something, there was something like about 78 of these teams living in the villages with the local militia, the local popular forces. And these Marines were great Marines. I mean, they were wonderful, wonderful Marines. They volunteered to go and live with people, try to work and protect the people and the villages and stuff. But people in these villages, they were VC. And these were their neighbors, the people that they grew up with. They're their husbands, their wives, their uncles, nephews, relatives. No matter how much you want to work with help people, you're only going to be there for a year. You're not going to live there among those people, and they know it. So the whole hearts and minds thing, the whole pacification thing, it sounded really good intellectually. I mean, we're going to separate the people out. We're going to find out who the VC are, and then we're going to kill the VC. Well, how are you going to do that? You don't speak a word of Vietnamese. You don't understand anything about the culture. You know nothing. So here we go on these exercises, and we get a couple thousand Vietnamese together in villages. We get them all lined up. We feed them and give them food and tell them how the government's really great and loves them, which they know is absolute nonsense. And just be good guys and go back to the villages and love your government and turn in all the VC, turn in your nephews and relatives and stuff like that. It was insane. The whole thing was insane. The idea that we're going to go in and pacify people that they've lived with their whole lives, are going to spend the rest of their lives living with, and they're going to want democracy, Thomas Jefferson, and all this kind of stuff is just crazy. And also, we never, ever dealt with the problem of the numbers of the VC. Now, I'm going to show you a book that I think is two books I think are very, very important. This one is called War of Numbers by Sam Adams. And he goes into, we just do not understand how all these villages, the VC have penetrated. There's committees for everything. Committees for old people, committees for first aid, committees for education, committees for weapons training, committees for liaison with North Vietnamese units, liaisons for guides, liaisons for everything. The VC had been in these villages for years and years and years, and they'd set up their own village structures. So the government has their mayor and their official government, but the VC have theirs. It's the inner government. Now, another book that I'm going to show you is written by a very, very dear and good friend of mine, Dr. Jeffrey Race. War Comes to Long An. A very, very great book. Dr. Race, he's also a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And he wrote this wonderful, wonderful classic on how we just didn't understand how embedded the Viet Cong War. We had no idea who we were fighting, really. And then I have another book. This book was written by a Vietnamese, Tran Ngoc Chau. The title is called Vietnamese Labyrinth. He is one of the most respected Vietnamese that there is. Tran Ngoc Chau started off as a Viet Minh communist at a very early age. He fought in the North Vietnamese army against the French. He was an intellectual. He understood and he was very, very pro-Viet Minh. And then he reverted back to his Confucianism from his father and his Buddhism. And then he decided that Marxism and Leninism is not the way to liberation that he thought. So he joined the French, and then later on he joined the Americans, and he took on many positions. But because he was so honest, the South Vietnamese government put him in prison on Con Dao Island They imprisoned him because he was an honest man and pointing out corruption in high places. He goes into how really, really in depth all this embedded nature was. So our pacification program at the village, we had no chance whatsoever.
Feeling joy and grizzly bear, fall like a flying to the air. Over the dune, my ugly birds beware. I go in stand 'cause they gave me a turn like a 20 try. I want to